Thank you very much, everyone. While Aaron is getting set up, I want to share a story with you, give you a little background where we're coming from. So as Russ was saying, he was asking, what does the Z stand for? And it stands for zero downtime. So Aaron, myself, and Allison actually work at IBM under IBM Z. So when we say zero downtime, we actually guarantee 99.999999% uptime in certain configurations, right? So that equates to a ridiculous amount of uptime. And we really care about reliability and we really care about security. So there's a lot of focus we do on that area. And that's really what we wanted to kind of share with you today is our transformation story, how we had to tweak some of the InnerSource concepts so that they fit into our Z paradigm. So today we'll talk about, mainframe and Z a little bit more. We'll go through the InnerSource and reducing duplication. Everyone knows the value of InnerSource that we have, but it impacted us a little bit more. With documentation efforts, how wonderful that's been, success stories, and then some tips and tricks later on. So like I said, Z is a monolithic mainframe, right? The classic mainframe that you think about. It was first GA'd in 1964, and our latest incarnation is the Z17. As you can see here, we continuously add different features to it. Right, so you can see we've added different accelerators in terms of AI. We have quantum safe security. We integrate with hybrid cloud solutions, and we talk about having enterprise grade reliability. So we're always thinking about how we can incorporate security and quality into everything we do, including the tools that we use to generate code, to work on code, to check things, all of the automation that we have in our build pipelines. We really care about the reliability and scalability. And specifically, the three of us are in IBM ZOS. So this is the premier operating system that runs on the mainframe. So it offers a lot of different pieces. So one thing I wanted to share was a quick story about my first day as an intern working on Z. So I arrive and my mentor's like, great, we're gonna go over to the lab floor, which is ridiculously impressive. So we go over to one of the mainframes that he's running transactions on. Tons of lights are going off. He shows me the system. He says, look, here's all the different things that are scrolling through, all the transactions that are happening. We're running a test. Literally thousands of things. It's scrolling so fast, you can't even tell what anything says. And he just pulls a cord out, right? Things were green, now they are red. 10 seconds later, they're green again, right? And he's like, this is what we do. Right? We have redundancy in everything we have. We have a ridiculous amount of testing and processes we have in place to make sure that all of our systems stay up. So I had worked on the system verification test team with Aaron early on, and that's what we did. So as I went through my internship, he actually said, hey, you're going to write a workload now in a proprietary language. All right, here's what I wanted to do. So I sat down, I made a design, right? Here's the workflow, here's what I want to do. And I said, great, where's the book that tells me how to do this proprietary language? So I get the PDF and I look at it and it's, basic commands. Here's like how to do each piece. I'm like, does anyone ever have like a queue they've done before? Does anyone have a library it could have to have like a queue object that I can pull from and put things into? And he's like, okay, go talk to this guy over here. I talked to that guy and he's like, here's a snippet of code, right? It's in this data set. I took a look at it, literally 10,000 lines of code, one data set. And then I went and said, okay, I also wanted to do this. Who has code for that? So I wound up building this gigantic network of people trying to figure out what code we had today, right? I mean, this was a million years ago, trying to figure out what code we had that I could reuse. And I was thinking about it like when we were gonna give this presentation, that's the essence of InnerSource, right? Is I can quickly find things now. We're InnerSourcing as many tools as we possibly can so we can reuse this information. We can reuse libraries and things like that. So we all know the InnerSource benefits. We have a little bit of a different approach usually in Z, as you can imagine, with the security and reliability. And for a long time, it was coached to us, open source, you got to be careful with that, right? Because of the different licensing pieces and things like that early on in the open source world, we were concerned about it impacting the operating system. So there's really a stigma that we kind of had to overcome. So we wound up creating this specific team focused on the Z team's use of InnerSource called Z InnerSource, because we wanted to convey to the team that it is really for them and it can help them specifically, no questions about that. So we really wanted to kind of adopt this mechanism early and make sure that it fit into the Z guidelines, into the processes and procedures that we have around that. So with that, what couple of the big things that we ran into snafu-wise is we have a ton of custom tools. hundreds, right? So I said 1964. I'm not kidding you, 1964. So we have thousands of developers who have been working on it for 60 years. We've accrued a lot of essential tools over that time. We have a lot of different components that comprise ZOS. So there's over 100 different components. So a lot of tools were duplicated across different components that weren't even in the product at one point and then slowly moved in. Those tools became siloed, like I needed it to do this one specific thing for a component, not this other piece. So here's what I coded it up for. So we really had these significant silos worked on them. And because we have such a vast amount of tooling, we're always just trying to, keep basic maintenance, improve where we have to, and add new tools if we really have to. So InnerSource, as you can see, helps a lot of these different pieces here. And I would say that we actually have 2 full-time engineers right now that are working in the tool space with a few of us. And specifically, half of the stuff I've asked them to do is say, I want to make sure everything is inner-sourced early on. So once you get, here's a tool, I need you to write a README for it, right? Some documentation, maybe we should figure out how to build it. And then we put it in InnerSource, right? So that everyone else can then capitalize on that. So with that, Aaron's going to take us through some of the cool things we've done.
Yeah, and I'm actually going to kind of start in the same way that Mike did, and kind of mention some of my beginnings as well, because it kind of helps with some of the story. So I came into SVT, and Mike was a mentor of mine. He interviewed me, and kind of in the same way, I started with tooling and started to play in that landscape. And as Mike already mentioned, we have a lot of areas where it's not really documented well. It wasn't really, shared amongst people too much. And it brought us to the point where I started working on tools in the same way. I started working on automation and built up a reputation in this area. And eventually the question of, we have too many tools, we need to A, catalog them, and B, reduce them, became a goal. And I didn't know where to go. And luckily around the same time, Jenna, Wendy, and Michaela were actually doing some work on the InnerSource portal. I don't know if you guys are going to talk about the portal in depth later at some point, hopefully. But I'll give a brief overview where they built this portal. Jenna kind of mentioned it earlier as the Google of our internal tools, right? Where we can go and we can look for a way to see what tools are out there, what tools exist. So this is all fine and dandy, but we ran into a quick problem. As Mike had mentioned, we have a lot of custom tooling. We have a lot of proprietary tooling. We have a lot of tools written in assembler and a proprietary language called PLX. They don't play well with traditional paradigms. So that Z InnerSource piece became really important, right? So we had a problem of needing to get those tools, A, into GitHub, and B, to get them, playing in this basic structure that was set out for us, right? So in this basic structure, for anyone that plays in GitHub, there's not too much craziness going on here. We've got a Git and GitHub file. You get those for free whenever you start in Git. And then some basics, some open source basics, right? We've got a co-noters file so that you know who this repo belongs to. Who do I need to go bug when I have questions? Who am I going to open my pull request to? Some issue templates, a pull request template, nothing special there. And then just some guidance on how your team works, right? In a traditional landscape of, mainframe developers, we don't need this. We work in data sets. Why would we have this? And then, kind of as years progressed, we started to modernize our stuff, moved into Git. And now we're trying to get these people involved and intertwined in our, ecosystem of InnerSource as a whole, right? What Michaela, Wendy, and Jenna have done is build a top tier layer that we kind of nestle under, right? So that's where that Z InnerSource team kind of comes under. We try and partner with the larger team to say, hey, we want to participate, but we also want to contribute back. We may be specialized, but there are also going to be areas where we're not, right? We have a big GitHub Actions beta going on right now, and our Z InnerSource team is driving that, going from archaic to front of the line, right? So depending on who you talk to, right, mainframe is kind of coming to the forefront and playing in a lot of those spaces. You've probably seen a lot go on in the media with, IBM kind of forging ahead and the traditional stack coming back, right? So with that comes one of our main contributions, the documentation, right? It was mentioned before that having good documentation and allowing people to self-educate is going to be really, really positive towards your efforts, right? And one of the first things we did was we realized that, trying to bring these people into the age of GitHub and all of these modern tools, CI/CD, AI, agentic, we're going to need to document how we transition, how you go from one to the other. And that Z InnerSource team has done additional things like provide additional tooling. We write some code ourselves to help us progress from one to the other and, make sure that we are an active participant in this, right? So in that documentation, we bring together a lot of things, right? A base set of standards. We push good documentation not only on ourselves, but try and say in your projects, we require it as well, or we would like to have it. Fostering that InnerSource community and providing back, and also providing an adaptable system, right? So not only guides on getting started with InnerSource, but language and language stack guidance, security guidance, as Mike will talk about in a little bit, and a little bit about open source guidance, because we've started a journey of linking InnerSource and open source together, as well as with our product cycle as well. I'll also kind of leave a tidbit here of, while we talk about that InnerSource community and reducing duplication, some competition is good in that realm, right? We want to mimic the open source realm, and in the open source world, we don't always have teams working in a copacetic nature. So, some of that competition and driving innovation through, parallel projects is also allowed as well. So in that base set of standards, I'm going to kind of hand wave over this slide. We're asking for a lot of things out of the people that participate in InnerSource, especially in the Z realm. We want to maintain that code quality, all the things we've probably heard today, more consistency when you move from project to project, so making it easier to jump from one effort to the next, allowing for faster development cycles with continuous integration development, helping with compliance. Mike will talk about this a little bit when he goes through some of the security slides, but just because we are internal in nature does not mean we will never be external, right? You saw the NLP talk to start us off today. If you maintain that compliance as you're going through and building up that project, you won't have to deal with it on the way out, right? Improving collaboration and communication. I'm going to talk about some showcases that we've run. Hacktoberfest has already been mentioned today, but just driving ways to get the community involved and to have people participate, to put on demos, to show people, hey, it's this easy to InnerSource something. I've given so many talks on InnerSource at IBM where, similar to what I'm doing right now, I'm not going to do it right now because I'm not prepared for it, but I go through and I'm talking for 90 seconds and I InnerSource a project in front of people and they're like, wait a minute, that's all it took, right? And it's about showing people the ease that you can have to get in and get your foot in the door. So with that, just a kind of, appreciation for some of the projects that have come through our pipeline. We've had a couple of projects that have gone through our InnerSource pipeline that have now become open source in the Z space. We've got PyRackF, which is a security maintenance tool, as well as PyIPCS that helps with dump management and things of that nature. And then last but not least, before I kind of hand this back to Mike, I want to talk about Ambitus, which is something that has existed long before our InnerSource process, but we've kind of connected with in that InnerSource to open source journey to enable, a full sweep through, right? Saying just because your project is InnerSource today, doesn't mean it won't belong to something bigger later, right? And Ambitus is a project that Joe Boschman in the back of the room actually runs that belongs to the Open Mainframe project under the Linux Foundation, and really has helped drive the benefits of InnerSource to our leadership in Z, right? Showing that just because it starts as InnerSource and just because we are, a smaller piece in a very legendary industry that's been around for 60 years, the InnerSource projects can still hold some weight and kind of punch above their class. And I'll give this back to Mike for a second.
So I'm going to talk about security now because that's my role, but specifically sharing an analogy about open source. Going back to cars. So one of my first cars was a car I bought off eBay, a 1966 Mustang. So I saw 5 pictures of it and it basically said, doesn't run, doesn't stop, doesn't drive. And I bought it. I had no idea, right, what condition it was in, what the person did before me, how they took care of it, how they drove it, all those fun things. So that's kind of what happens with open source, right? I don't know, besides the specific guidelines that are outlined today, what happened in the past. So you kind of have to vet things a little bit more appropriately. When we're talking about InnerSource, I feel like it's more like buying a car from somebody you know, right? I don't know when they last changed the oil, but I can call them and ask them, right? So I have a little bit more confidence in the security and reliability pieces of it. And there's definitely, the zero trust side of me definitely questions everything. But really, there's some confidence there that you can have in things. So I wanted to touch upon some of the interesting security by design items. So at the trust security page, we have this wheel kind of outlining some of the things we're summarizing that we do at IBM compared to the secure software development framework from NIST. So effectively, what we're talking about is, do all of these things apply to InnerSource? We know that they apply to products, certainly, and I would say that they absolutely do. So I'm a huge advocate of part of our templates, part of the different pipelines, we should have code scans incorporated so that we can make sure that we're running static code analyzers, we're running secret scans, dynamic scans. So anything that we can, effectively run a tool, execute on the pipeline, get feedback on the code we've written. Now it increases our confidence on the different code quality that's coming in, especially when it's been, potentially developed by AI. There's other areas that I also think apply. Privacy assessment is a critical one, right? We don't want to store different credentials or other information about people that we shouldn't be in InnerSource. Same thing with vulnerability management, having a plan for how you're going to manage vulnerabilities and communicate that people need to pick up new versions of things, using things like Dependabot to monitor for dependencies that need to be updated, things like that are helpful. And some of the other things I still think apply. We're not going to pay for a full penetration test, right, for an InnerSource project, but we certainly should have specific test cases around security, right? Maybe even have a security engineer review some of the tests or design some of the tests, not necessarily go through a secure release process, but I do a lot of code reviews on InnerSource projects just to give them feedback, right? And it could be as simple as, you're hard coding an IP here, we should extract that and pull it out, or this thing hasn't been announced yet, so let's not broadcast it to even the folks inside the company. So there's really a lot of different pieces that kind of apply to different varying degrees. In the Z security space, right, we certainly have a lot more rigor when it comes to these things, but in a general InnerSource project, it should be considered, right? Even with a threat model, you don't have to have reviews and approvals, but certainly you want to think about, how can an actor use this? How could it potentially be used maliciously? And think about those risks, and maybe you can address them with a small feature.
I will add to that last piece, especially as you talk about the review process. There have been so many times where I've interfaced with a newer hire, or even someone more tenured than me that's just less familiar with a language or something like that, and you have to tell them, hey, you may not be doing this in the most efficient way. This will cause technical debt for you in the future. If this becomes something more, this is going to be a pain in the butt to take out, right? So you get to help in more ways than one with some of those reviews as well. But to kind of wrap up here before we get to questions, I do want to talk about some of the successful patterns that we've seen used, in addition to all of the things that we've kind of talked about today, laying out documentation, having these reviews with people, allowing ourselves to have a team that enables other people. We've also had some great support from above us. First things first, Oktoberfest, I've mentioned it a couple of times. We just got through the month of October, and it was great. We basically allowed people to come in and say, hey, all of these projects are on the table. They're owned by us, they're owned by others. Some participation by the community, some participation by the major team, and just come in, learn how to go through the process. You can make zero code contributions as well. We accept designers, we accept anybody. If you want to write documentation, if you want to help us with the design, if you want to help with tests, come one, come all. And through the month of October, we had tons of people come in and work on projects, ask a bunch of questions. So that was great. Something we also did in the fourth quarter that I really liked and I put on personally was a showcase where we picked 3 projects. We gave them 20 minutes each, or 15, 20 minutes each. And they just went through and they talked about InnerSource however they felt, right? They had been participating in InnerSource for months. They had interacted with InnerSource in one way or another. And we kind of gave them the stage to say whatever they wanted, positive or negative, right? Because we need the negative feedback as well. We need to take that up the chain. We need to adhere those to the solutions that we're going to provide as well, to the documentation that we have, to the process that we have. And it went great. People really liked it. They were surprised about the projects that were involved. For the first one that we had a lot of senior developers that had been involved in the process long before InnerSource, but kind of joined on. So it was good to have their support. And last but not least, the basic one, the one everybody knows, are hackathons, right? Coming up with interesting ways to get people involved and just trying to say, hey, we're going to bake in InnerSource at the start. we're going to throw an AI hackathon, but everyone has to start with an inner source pattern. All of these projects will be inner sourced, right? You get people involved without even getting them involved, right? They get a basis to say, hey, you know, I need these files. I need my, you know, contributing file. I need my my templates. I need my, you know, how to get started, so that my project looks the part as well, right? It can be in that portal that we showed before that I'm hoping someone is presenting on. But you know, it allows people to see how easy it is to get involved by the paradigms that have been set by us and above us. And I think that's all we got.
So while you're thinking of questions, one thing I wanted to share is, you know, we worked with our executive team to kind of share the inner source projects that have gone open source, some of the inner source projects that have gone into products, and some of the inner source projects that actually contribute to our critical productivity items or are required parts of our build processes. So we did get, you know, executive buy-in from that standpoint, you know, sharing that people should participate in the hackathons, but also they gave, you know, we have a company-wide points, right? Like a credit card point system, and they actually contributed points. So we wound up creating like a bounty type program to incentivize folks to work on side projects, right? The inner source projects, so that we could see additional contributors to things that were critical to the business, right? So there really are additional ways you can incentivize folks. I know I've had people, you know, like I'll pay for pizza or something like that, or buy them coffee, and we'll sit for 2 hours and work on a project. And it works out quite well. People like free food.
I'll also kind of add to that, because it was a side conversation that I had with Wendy before. A lot of the chatter that we've had here, almost up until that final piece, has been grassroots, right? Bottom up. We really focused on the community. We focused on the people and driving things that way rather than going top down.